Real or AI? From Islington in North London, the latest from podnews.net with Supporting Cast, trusted by the biggest names to sell podcast subscriptions. Spotify is building AI versions of its hosts for ad reads, according to the Bill Simmons podcast. There's going to be a way to use my voice for the ads, he says, before adding that he would need to give approval first. We would point out that Spotify relatively uniquely requires a signed-in account to listen, and therefore has personal data available for each of its listeners and collects even more. Technically, that could mean that Joe Rogan is able to address you by name in a personalised ad, then sell you a new security system tailored to your street name. We wouldn't want anything bad to happen to that nice house in Parsons Street now, would we? Technically possible, perhaps, if not editorially desirable, but not possible for the majority of ad sales companies who don't have sign-in data. In his latest podcast, prominent podcaster and YouTuber Bandrew Scott explains why shows from companies like NPR and Slate are not doing well on YouTube. He suggests podcasters need to supply YouTube with video and a specific re-edit to make the most of the platform. As to whether YouTube's integration into YouTube Music is working, he shares these statistics for the Bandrew Says podcasts. 20,000 views on YouTube, and just one on YouTube Music. He says that's probably him. YouTube has added a Podcasts tab to the YouTube TV interface, but it's hidden in the More tab unless you already watch podcasts frequently. Podcast studio Rococo Punch has been acquired by Audily, a podcast and audiobook company. No terms were given. Ballon Studios, the podcast company hosted by YouTuber and podcaster Mr. Ballon, has launched a talent management arm. Goalhanger Podcasts is to switch to Spotify's Megaphone and the Spotify Audience Network. The company is currently with Acast and produces some of the largest shows in the UK, including The Rest is Politics. The companies will announce their new relationship at the podcast show here in London tomorrow. And financial company Albi has partnered with Castamatic to allow the podcast app to support value for value, where listeners can pay for shows they listen to. And in podcast news, Realm has launched the Jane Austen podcast with comedian and writer Alison Larkin. Each season will present an Austen novel with her award-winning narration and feature chats with actors, writers and others who have one thing in common: a passionate love for Jane Austen. And a new audio drama from the BBC, People Who Knew Me, launches today. It stars Rosamund Pike and Hugh Laurie and is the story of Emily Morris, a woman who uses an emergency call to fake her own death and run away to start a new life in California as Connie Prynne. This podcast is sponsored by Supporting Cast. What does Sony, Pushkin, APM, Slate, WNYC Studios, Savage Lovecast, Q-Code and Tenderfoot TV all have in common? They all rely on Supporting Cast to sell podcast subscriptions. Find out why at supportingcast.fm. And that's the latest from our newsletter. To read all the stories and subscribe, we're at podnews.net.